Hello, my name is Hayden and this is the Native Sweatband. The American Indian Movement from 1969 to 1975 served as a turning point in the way Native Americans are perceived in the U.S. AIM garnered national attention through protests like the occupation of Alcatraz, the Trail Broken Treaties, and the Wounded Knee occupation. AIM is an organization that brings things like police brutality, stolen land, and much more. It began as a grassroots movement in 1968 in response to police brutality and racial profiling. It later became the turning point behind the indigenous civil rights movement or the Red Power movement. Hello, my name is Dennis Banks. I'm the founder of AIM, the American Indian Movement. In 1966, I was sent to the Stillwater, Minnesota State Prison for 5 years for stealing groceries to feed my family. In prison, I researched all the movements going on around the world and realized that natives didn't have a movement, only small local protests. When I was released from prison in May 1968, I called my friend from a Native American boarding school, George Mitchell. I said, George, I want to get a movement going, and I'd like you to help me. I figured that with the two of us, we could set up meetings with the American Indian community in Minneapolis to make the changes that we needed. We started our work in the summer of 1968 by contacting all the natives and went to the Indian slums of the city. We handed out 500 leaflets we had printed to every native we could find and told them we need to have a meeting. Our first meeting was on July 28, 1968, in the basement of a run-down church. When our meeting started, we had almost 200 people there. I said to them, people are fighting battles on the streets of Chicago. They're fighting to stop the Vietnam War and trying to bring about changes in the political system. They're fighting in the streets of Alabama to change the situation for blacks. The SDS movement is trying to change the whole structure of universities. What are we going to do? Are we going to sit here in Minnesota and not do a thing? Or are we going to go on for another 200 years the way we are without doing something for our Indian people? The meeting continued, more and more people started to speak up. A man named Clyde Bellecourt spoke about police brutality. He said, when he proposed we go down to Franklin Avenue, to all those Indian bars where the cops abuse our people every night, I said to him, we could go down there tomorrow morning. No, he said, let's go down there right now, tonight. In that meeting, Clyde spoke with such intensity it swept over us like a storm. In that moment, the idea of AIM was born. That night, we held protests about police brutality. When our movement started, we still didn't have a name. George Mitchell came up with the name Concerned Indian Americans, and we used it, till someone pointed out the initials were CIA. During one of our first meetings, a woman said, you always aim to do this or that. Why don't we just call ourselves AIM? We immediately made Clyde Bellecourt our first chairman. We first want to deal with police brutality. Only 10% of Minneapolis' population were native, but 70% of inmates in city jails were also native. George, Clyde, and I painted our cars red. We established the Indian Patrol to stop the harassment. This idea was based off the Black Panthers in Oakland. I rejected violence and other methods that involve force like the Black Panthers, but I knew we'd do whatever we had to with our goals. I didn't want AIM to be seen as a group that advocated violence, but on the other hand, I didn't want us to go against heavily armed racist cops empty-handed. We first went to the chief of police, but he said, no, there's no racism here. We told him, we'll prove it to you. We began carrying walkie-talkies and wearing identical red berets. We went down to the Indian bars and recorded them arresting our people and hitting them with nightsticks. Later, we emptied all the native customers from the bar. By the time the cops showed up, there was nobody left to arrest. The number of arrests would drop dramatically. AIM would go on to do bigger, more impactful protests. Just 2 years after they started, they already have 5,000 people. One of AIM's biggest and most memorable protests is the occupation of Alcatraz. Hello, my name is Richard Oakes, and I was the leader of the Alcatraz occupation in 1969. Our first attempt to take the island was with a handful of people on November 9, 1969. We stayed one night before being removed by authorities. In response to being removed, I talked to the San Francisco Chronicle and said, if a one-day occupation of white men on Indian land years ago established squatters' rights, then the one-day occupation of Alcatraz should establish Indian rights to the land. We tried again November 20 with the power of 89 men, women, and children, and we were finally able to take Alcatraz Island. We knew our occupation was legal, but we ignored it and moved to the guards' quarters and warden's house. We tagged the buildings with graffiti like Red Power and Custer had to come. We even tagged the lighthouse with Peace and Freedom, welcome home with free Indian land. We claimed the island as ours by right discovery and offered to buy it for $24 in glass beads and red cloth, the same price that was offered for the island of Manhattan. Weary of the fault that happened, President Nixon tried to remove us from the island. His administration decided to leave us alone as long as we remained peaceful. In time, government officials came and visited on the island to negotiate, but were never successful. Over time, the population of Alcatraz grew over to 600 natives, and a governing council was formed. We soon got a clinic, a kitchen, a public relations department, a nursery, and a grade school for the children. We also got a security group called the Bureau of Caucasian Affairs. It was a play on the much-hated Bureau of Indian Affairs. They patrolled the shoreline checking for intruders. We even got a radio show called Radio Free Alcatraz run by John Trudeau. During late 1969, the occupation was going better than I could have ever expected. By 1970, that would change. College students had to leave to continue their studies, and they were replaced by vagrants, who cared more about living a rent-free life than the original cause. Our biggest problems are the freelance photographers and the hippies at the time. Drugs and alcohol were also starting to circle freely across certain members of the population. Things only got worse in January 1970, when my daughter fell down one of the prison stairwells to her death. Because of the accident, my wife and I would leave Alcatraz. Over time, it became a fight to control Alcatraz. In May, President Nixon's administration cut off power to the island, and a few weeks later, a fire spread across the island, destroying lots of its historical buildings. On June 11, 1973, federal marshals descended on the island and removed the remaining natives. The 19th-month occupation had a big push for AIM. It was one of the many important occupations. Hello, it's me again, Dennis Banks. A few years after the occupation of Alcatraz, AIM set their eyes on a new place, Wounded Knee. After our actions, Tribal President Dick Wilson banned all activities on the Pioneers Reservation. We considered his ways of being corrupt, but by having an occupation at Wounded Knee would cause a federal investigation to be launched in his administration. We also hope for an investigation to be launched on the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Indian-Burman treaties. We also choose Wounded Knee because it was a major historical significance. It is where the 300 Dakota natives were murdered by the U.S. Army in the Battle of Wounded Knee. On February 27th, about 200 AIM-led Sioux took Wounded Knee and were able to take 11 of Dick Wilson's allies hostage. The next day, we traded gunfire with federal marshals, and I started negotiations for the release of the hostages. I demanded that they launch an investigation on the Bureau of Indian Affairs, all Sioux reservations in South Dakota, and that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hold scores on Indian treaties broken by the government. Our occupation would last 71 days and ended because the White House agreed to investigate our complaints. During that time, 2 Sioux men were shot and killed. Russell Means and I were arrested afterwards, but then released by a federal judge. In the courts, some tribes went to settlements with federal and state governments, with some even including tribal land claims. For example, in 1971, a Chippewa family challenged an unexpected property tax bill they received from the county obtaining the reservation. The case would go up to the Supreme Court. This case opened up the door for tribes to open up gambling establishments, which are seen as having the potential of bringing massive amounts of income. AIM also led laws such as NAGPRA, or the Native American Grave Protection and Restoration Act, which is where places like museums and universities have returned anything they had, like bones and artifacts of tribes. In 1974, AIM called for a meeting for all indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere to meet in South Dakota. Over 94 nations arrived and formed the International Indian Treaty Council, which was then recognized by the UN later that year. With many of its leaders in prison, AIM would end up disbanding in 1978. Small groups continued to function at Vulcan Court, but the U.S. government took no further steps to honor broken Indian treaties. AIM was a turning point in Native American history because it led to things like land being returned to natives and broken treaties being rediscovered. It also brought awareness to Native American rights, which can be seen on placards at colleges, and even changed the way how Americans and government agents viewed and gave respect to Native Americans.